So we came up with a budget during the presidential campaign, which I will put into the chat here. And as I said, it's a $41.7 trillion program over 10 years. And its goal is to get to zero and then negative emissions and 100% clean energy in a decade. We said by 2030, here we are, 2022. So we're saying a decade now. And it meets the basic needs of all, makes this energy transition. And we also estimated how many jobs, and we just used existing technology, their costs, and the jobs created per dollar amount invested. And we came up with, for the whole program, 38 million jobs would be created, including 8.7 million in manufacturing, which has been something that a lot of people, and I agree, we agree, have said we need to, rebuild our manufacturing so we aren't dependent on supply chains from places like China, like we found out during the COVID crisis. And we're now finding out in terms of components and rare earth minerals and so forth for the solar energy. So this 41.7 trillion was broken down into 27.5 trillion over 10 years. We call it the Green Economy Reconstruction Program to get to zero emissions and 100% clean energy. And that part created 30.5 million jobs, including 8.5 million in manufacturing. That's where most of the manufacturing jobs would come from. The Economic Bill of Rights to end poverty and economic insecurity was guaranteeing the rights to a living wage job, an income above poverty through a guaranteed minimum income, affordable housing through a radical expansion of quality public housing available to anybody, so that everybody would have an affordable option and housing would be affordable, whether you were going to public housing or the private market, because the private market would have to compete with that. Quality healthcare through a universal public healthcare system. And we're advocating not just national health insurance, but a national health service where the hospitals and other assets of a health system are under democratic public control, which has become a bigger issue over the years because the corporatization of the hospitals and clinics. Quality healthcare, lifelong public education from childcare and pre-K through college and trade school at public colleges and trade schools, and a secure retirement through increased Social Security benefits. So we're talking about jobs, income, healthcare, housing, education, and retirement. And that program would create 7.6 million additional jobs, including 300,000 in manufacturing. Now, a lot of people say, wow, that's a big price tag. It would nearly double the federal budget. But our argument is that we need the public enterprise planning and coordination to transform all our productive systems to clean energy and zero emissions, not just power production, which gets most of the discussion, but also transportation, which is as big in terms of its carbon emissions, buildings, which are also big, manufacturing and agriculture. And we need this planning and coordination because we need to do things like link transportation systems to new public housing so we can create walkable communities, which are more energy and resource efficient. That's part of creating an ecologically sustainable society. We need to phase in clean production systems, particularly in manufacturing, without disrupting supply chains or making sure they have supply chains. And this is where the public enterprise comes in. If we don't take over public ownership of these key sectors, the power sector, the oil and gas sector, the transportation sector, and at least a big part of the banking sector, these companies are going to keep using their carbon emitting production systems for their whole projected lifespan. And that'll be too late because a lot of these production systems still have decades to go. And we got to get off of a carbonized economy. Another part of the Green New Deal, and this is something that we really need to emphasize because, even if the United States adopted a domestic Green New Deal, the global situation is if the rest of the world doesn't also do that, we're screwed from climate catastrophe. So our Ecosocialist Green New Deal budget had $1 trillion over the 10 years for a global Green New Deal. And that was basically fully funding the UN's Green Climate Fund, which was created in 2010, and is supposed to have, had a goal of $100 billion a year by 2020. And in fact, the cumulative investment in that Green Climate Fund over that now 12 years since it was initiated is only 10 billion. I mean, this is pathetic. There's just no help from the countries like the United States that historically made most of the emissions to mitigate the damage and loss already being suffered, particularly by the poor countries in the global South, and to finance their transition to a clean energy system. And, you know, if the US was to contribute its fair share, the US Climate Action Network, a lot of their groups did some research as we were approaching the last UN climate conference in Glasgow. And, you know, they noted that according to the International Panel on Climate Change, we need 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 to just have a 50-50 chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a threshold for that's still possible if we move immediately, and beyond which it gets pretty disastrous. So sometimes it's called climate reparations. So what they said, for the US to contribute its fair share, we wouldn't have to reduce 50%, we'd have to reduce 195%. Now, of course, we can't do that with domestic emissions. They said 70% domestic emissions cuts by 2030, and then 125% of our current emissions in international emissions reductions through US financial and technological aid to these countries in the global South. That is what we should be doing for a global Green New Deal. And this climate reparations program is not even on the agenda unless the Green Party puts it there.